Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. I'm learning how to say this very, very fast. Today, we are continuing our series on the book by CJ Fearnley, which we are in the process of putting together. It should be out soon. So today we are going to be talking about the comprehensivism of Buckminster Fuller. So the format, first, everybody is welcome to talk for about 2 minutes on what they got from the essay, Comprehensive Thinking of Buckminster Fuller. After everybody has had a chance to comment, and today there aren't that many people, so if you want to go 3 minutes, that's fine. Once that is done, I'm going to invite people to make presentations on anything connected with this theme. I hope that we'll have lots of things to say. And if somebody wants ideas, you can look back at a whole year of meetups that we did on Buckminster Fuller. And we can talk about what we got from that entire year of meetups on Bucky. And then we'll have a general discussion. All right, so that's the plan. So if you'd like to share what you got from the essay, go ahead and type an exclamation mark in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Who would like to go first? We're going to start with Maritza. Maritza, go ahead.
So, this episode or this chapter of CJ's, to me, it was like it's a synopsis of a lot of things he kind of was spoon feeding us. Well, those of us with the Thinking Society for years, those of us with 52 Living Ideas, a few less years. And I was familiar with Buckminster Fuller's philosophy before I realized I was familiar with his philosophy. That's the manner in which it was presented to me. It was like in these small little bite-sized pieces that here in this essay, we hear them called out as, they're key aspects of the comprehensive thinking of Buckminster Fuller. Here, what we're all doing on Wednesdays, learning, we're seeking to learn, deeply and broadly, that is Buckminster Fuller. Everything we do has a wrapping that includes his philosophical works. The call to do more with less. We speak about that all the time in a variety of different ways, and it seems like such a generic statement. But shockingly enough, there's not but so many philosophers out there saying it. So this is the legacy of Buckminster Fuller. And that's what this essay is about. It's pointing out that this great man made these seemingly small observations, as it were. And they're observations that all of us can pick up and walk with. And they're not so heavy. Like there are some philosophical things that we learn, but they're kind of heavy. And it's like, it takes a while before you can pick it up and move with it. You kind of have to look at it from many angles. So many of his things are very light and you can walk with them. And, they're going to get bigger and they're going to get heavier, but they'll get heavier with you. So you'll already be used to the existing weight as you add to it. And what do I mean by this? I'm looking at, the idea of doing more with less. That's the concept of trim tap, which we learned from Buckminster Fuller, and he talks about the small little piece on a ship that turns a huge ship. And it's the idea of looking around our surroundings, seeing what we're doing, and asking ourselves, how can we do this with less? Do I really need all of these things? And then inviting those around us and with whom we interact to do the same, with the idea that if all of us do this, there will be the spiraling effect of now there's a community of people doing this, and a bigger community and a bigger community, and so on and so forth. And so it was very almost nostalgic for me to reread this essay, because I'm familiar now with all of these concepts. But most striking was really was to see how, oh wait, we've been doing this, and we do this, and it's to see how it's truly so digestible, which is a shocking thing, because honestly, Buckminster Fuller can be a little scary. If this is your first time reading anything of his, I would imagine you had a very different reaction to this essay. There's a lot there to unpack, but if you do it slowly and methodically, it's not too heavy. And those of us who walked with CJ for a few years before he made this chapter, we had the benefit of getting fed small, bite-sized pieces of it. And looking specifically at, the essay, he speaks about specifically the book, the operating manual for Spaceship Earth. And even that, the concept of this, the idea that we have this stewardship that we are, leaving misused, and that technically it's not our fault because we weren't given an operating manual. But you could see one in looking at other things. So we have talked about how, the operator manual could potentially be nature itself. And that's an interesting thing is that call to nature. And other philosophers we've spoken about here, where we look at the collaboration between nature and man and philosopher, as it were. And this helps us to see paths forward again. And, CJ, in this essay, he spends some time talking about the operator manual. And I love what he says is that in his reading, he learned that children have a spontaneous and comprehensive curiosity. And that's the beauty of that, is that's what we're trying to do here every week when we get together. And that's one of my favorite takeaways that CJ pointed out here. I really do. I love the reminder that we innately have it as children. So as adults, it's something we can reach back to and retrieve so that we can try to do that. And he speaks quite a bit about this idea of seeking to be more than specialized, and with respect for specialization. There's never any mention, and CJ never ever talked about how specialization was negative or bad or anything. It's not enough. It's not good enough. And so that's the premise. And he got that from Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller invites us in all of his key points to see deeper and to see wider, which is kind of funny because he actually literally says that that's what comprehensivist thinking would be, right? But even in something so small as that, the idea of seeking to be more generalized instead of specialized. He's not saying specialization is bad. He's just saying that it's too narrow in focus. So why not expand? And it's yet another concept that in theory, it's a very small concept, but it's actually a huge concept as well. And so I am gonna stop there, Shrikant, and I may come back later. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Would love to hear from everybody what they got from this chapter. We're going to start with next up is going to be Jeannie, Katie, and Joe. Jeannie, go ahead.
Well, I do think that the one thing that Bucky Fuller most affected us by is his analogy with the spaceship Earth. And it's something that I think is so deep. A lot of people have heard the phrase And I think it just really kind of goes to the heart of having a different worldview, and that includes ourselves. And I remember growing up, you know, when I was in college, he was making the rounds, and he would go to various colleges and always, you know, do these long talks, hours and hours. But afterwards, he would always go around, and anybody that wanted to talk to him was, you know, he was accessible, and he would just, you know, he was a bit deaf, so he didn't listen as well as he talked, but he definitely gave to everybody that wanted something, you know, some words. So I think that he really had a huge impact in being able to communicate to people, especially the youth in my era. And so many of the things he said came true. And I mean, when I saw what happened with education automation, because he had spoken about it in the 70s, you know, as though this was really going to happen, and it just seemed bizarre and impossible. And then it kind of overnight became a reality. And in the last part of the video, David S says something like, but, you know, he predicted that computers were going to solve everything. And look, they haven't, and all that. You know, I just want to say, wait, you know, give them a chance. Wait, we're not done yet. So I think so many of the things that he predicted were really quite spot on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. Next up is going to be Katie, followed by Joe. Katie.
Well, it kind of starts with a kind of lot of fun facts about the universe. And then I kept on reading it, and I was like, oh yeah, I remembered our last discussion where Bucky's well, we had to talk about how Bucky defined universe, because he has kind of his own definition of universe. And that got me thinking about how when people write something, what are they trying to do? Are they writing for themselves? Are they writing for contemporaries? Are they writing for future generations? And I think sometimes it's incidental, or not incidental, it's what's the word? Not intentional, that future generations might benefit. They might be writing for their own generation, but then later generations can then read and try to enter into their mindset that they had. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah. This is one of those essays that actually starts to, I think it was actually the first Wednesday night that we had gotten together, if I recall correctly, that where this was the introduction to Buckminster Fuller at 52 Living Ideas. And so I really think by using Spaceship Earth in particular was a very effective way of communicating Bucky's ideas. You in the previous session, you covered storytelling, and I think what Bucky's able to do is communicate his ideas through storytelling. And specifically, he's addressing the fact that in Spaceship Earth, that we tend to have our narrow perspective on the world. And he calls that the special case perspective. So that how do we then get out and break out of that worldview? And I think CJ's essay complements it very nicely when he talks about the ideas of how there are various philosophies of life and some of the positives and negatives that come along with those things. What they may say specifically is if you're talking about it in terms of, he talks about it, how some people would say that if we had to come up with an operating manual for Spaceship Earth. People that are deeply religious or have strong beliefs, that they would have said there is a manual. And then atheists would say, you know, basically they would have somewhat of a maybe an aversion to some of these myths, and as well as technocrats and people that I forget, actually at the top of my head, I'm forgetting the third category right off the top of my head, but bottom line is materialists, in which he refers to, and how they may actually look at the way Spaceship Earth is constructed and their story about how the world functions. But anyway, my point being is that all three of them, he uses these three as examples and the stories that they tell themselves. And that's the point, is that now Buckminster Fuller is telling a story. And the story is of how we actually work together much better than we do apart. The importance of collaboration, and CJ calls this out explicitly, the importance of collaboration within those groups, that we have varying perspectives, but that even though we have those differences and varying perspectives, that we can come to reasonable agreements, and that we're better actually for engaging people that do not have our perspective. And that is something where I think in today's world, not only we're fragmented for a number of different reasons, we're fragmented primarily because of the way we're educated, and actually the way, and Buckminster Fuller talks about that as well, in the sense that we're specialized. And so we're fragmented in the siloed in the specialization sense in the way we work, but we're also fragmented in the sense that our sense of belonging. We don't like to be uncomfortable with certain discussions. And by not having conversations, and difficult conversations sometimes, we tend to lack an ability to see the humanity in another individual. So understanding whether the inherent worth of each individual, or understanding the God in each individual, whatever it may be, you know, we can see something in each one of us. And that's where I think that where CJ was actually kind of trying to point out that each group has their own perspective. But how do we get out of our special case? And, you know, so that's where he's taking us with it, in the sense that that's the problem that he's actually addressing. And after, you know, kind of addressing that problem, you know, he starts to go into the details as to what it actually would mean to be a comprehensivist. What does it mean to be macro comprehensive, micro incisive, right? And to have depth and breadth. And taking us through that, I think that having a story along with it, meaning Bucky's story of operating manual Spaceship Earth and CJ's essays, give us a better idea actually how that would even look. And it goes back to even his previous essays, when he talks about it, and having our own epistemological approach to life, as far as how we come to know things to begin with, and the importance of that. So I think what Spaceship Earth is then telling us is telling us the story of how we think about things more on a more global, or actually more than global, think about things in terms of universe. And then we go from the macro to the micro. And I think that that's part of this idea, is that we tend to always go from the micro to the macro. And that's what highly specialized, very fragmented thinking societies do. There's also, the detailed approach when it comes to the idea of anticipatory design, which is actually not only looking, thinking about design in the sense that not just what we can get out of what we're doing today, but how do we think long term? And what are the structures that are in place? This is what Bucky actually speaks about more, that may prevent us from being able to do that, or may help us in doing that. So one thing I think is really important to call out is the fact that what if we don't become comprehensivists? What if we don't take the responsibility for actually learning and take advantage of actually engaging with other people? And Bucky actually provides an example of, like, we would be outsourcing our autonomy, our ability to think, to politicians, is in a sense. And I don't mean to demean politicians by any stretch of the imagination, but nonetheless, that don't be surprised if you can't voice what you want out of a government, or what you want out of anything, a society, that when it comes back on you, that the fact that it's not what you want, like you're being told what to do. So he's encouraging us to have an active relationship with comprehensivity and learning, as opposed to this passive relationship that many people do have. So I think the way CJ's essays have set this up, I think is also, it's important in the sense that he went from the idea of the material, the social, the ideals, the individual aspect of the individual experience. So the relationship between the self and the society as a whole. So the individual and its parts. That's a way of not looking at things being fragmented. But then the storytelling aspect of that, how that fits into this. And now he's telling Buckminster Fuller's story of Spaceship Earth and what that actually entails. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Folks, if you would like to comment for about 2 to 3 minutes on what you got from the essay, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. All right, one last chance, and then we'll go for presentations. So if you have any presentation connected with this, I know Jeannie has one, but anybody else, if you have any presentation connected with this essay about comprehensivity of Buckminster Fuller, if you need ideas, we did a whole 1 year of meetups on Buckminster Fuller, where we had experts on various aspects of Buckminster Fuller come and talk. So you can pick up on anything, and go from there. But let's start with Jeannie. If you'd like to present on anything connected with this theme, you're welcome to do that. Jeannie, go ahead.
Okay, well, I wanted to answer the question that Joe brought up in the video, which was, how does this fit in with form and function? So the spaceship Earth is a sphere, and it's not accidental that it is. There's a lot of spheres around us too. So the sphere, and I think when you talk about form, you have to, and the Earth and the other spheres, you have to talk more than just form as being a static thing, because all of these things are in continual motion. So here I have a little model. I'm reusing this, but I like this one because it's, this is us hanging off the surface, just, barely on here. So the thing is moving all the time and in various, directions. And I was glad Joe was here, because if we have time, he could explain the 8 degrees of freedom that Bucky lined up. But if you think of being on a ship, you know, you're standing on the ship, but you know, you're not always standing perpendicular to the deck anymore. That deck is moving around. And so you think of all the different directions that it could move, and various, you know, okay, so you're moving this way, but you're also moving maybe this way or this way at the same time. So all these motions put together. And it's really important to think about this, because this is our stability. Like a gyroscope, this is what keeps everything in place in our universe. And if we didn't have this motion, everything would change instantly. There would be no consistency or stability. So it's very important that you think about that. Now, the universe itself has changed immensely, you know, even since I was born. Galileo discovered the first galaxy, you know, the one we're in, but the other galaxies were not really discovered until 1924, 1926. And bit by bit, you know, as I was growing up, there became more and more and more galaxies. So our universe has been expanding at such a mind-boggling rate that, I mean, it could actually cause angst, I think, on, you know, if you think about it, that our universe is just getting so big. And one of the things that Bardini says is that, you know, where's our space for God? You know, we're just getting you know, he had a home up there before, but now where is he? You know, the thing is getting so huge. So I wanted to read a little something from him about, oh yeah, so then I wanted to say about the function. Okay, so the function of this spaceship Earth. And I think there's 2 functions. One function is to get where it's going. And I don't think we're ever going to find out what that is. And it seems to be mostly in circles. So, you know, where are we going? We don't really know. But I think we really can't deal with that very well. But the other part of the function is keeping the things that are on board alive till it gets there. So, you know, this becomes a function that we can easily engage in and start thinking about. So anyway, with the Gardini thing, I was thinking, well, this is such a natural way to think, like a comprehensivist, and, you know, to think like Spaceship Earth and stuff like that, but it's not at all. And so let me read this little thing from him about the medieval. Medieval man neither wished to explore the mysteries of the world empirically, nor did he want to illuminate them by a rational methodology. He was interested in building his world out of a content of revelation from the Bible and upon the principles and insights of classical philosophy, such as Aristotle and all that. He wanted to put those 2 things together, and that was his exegesis, as they say. So this whole idea of wanting to know everything and understand everything is a new idea, really, for human beings. And Bucky Fuller says the same thing. I was sort of surprised, and this was in Guinea Pig B. Up to a short time ago, that is to say the 20th century, humans were only innately wise, but comprehensively information ignorant. So we didn't have the information. So as we've gotten a bigger scope on what's going on, well, we begin to notice, you know, that we actually are having an effect on the Earth itself. And this is something that people in the past didn't understand about what they were doing. I mean, the Romans left a layer of lead, you know, at the Arctic, but they didn't know they left a layer of lead, nor did they have any ability to find out that they left a layer of lead. So, but we have the ability, it's a special new thing to understand what we're doing to the world. So let me see if there was something else I wanted to say about that. Yeah, we're in a special place as a species, that became self-aware. And in doing so, we can't help but notice that our actions have an effect. And just that it is it's an emergent thing in human beings, the whole idea of becoming comprehensive. And a lot of people are afraid of it, but it's an emerging thing. It's happening as we speak.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. Next up is Hunter. Hunter, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we might be at a point in history where the problem that comprehensivity is talking about might actually be resolved. That we're getting a sort of proper global multiculturalism for the first time. So just in the past couple of years, you notice there started to be the presence of influencers from Africa, the Middle East, especially, has sort of blown up. To some degree, you know, more Asian, sort of hitting our meme, our sphere, our circles, our theoretical filter bubbles aren't filtering the way they used to. And we're sort of at this point where we used to take our religions so seriously that we were held back by having to sort of dogmatically adhere to the worst parts about them. And then we went through a phase where we weren't giving them any attention at all. We didn't consider them worth our attention because we could use the silly bits to disprove the whole thing, and now we don't have to pay attention to the rest of it. And so what we're now coming to as a synthesis of those two previous eras is the time when we can genuinely and sincerely investigate the best within each religious system, precisely because we don't take any of them that seriously. There's this sort of meta-modern mixing of religion that's beginning to emerge. And we're beginning to say, wow, I've been using my spiritual practice. You know, I connect to something that feels beyond. We have these higher states of consciousness. We have transformations occurring in people's lives and sometimes in their bodies. And I'm discovering that the practices of my neighbor from a completely different tradition work really well. They fill in some of the gaps. I mean, I don't want to, you know, maybe I don't want to call them gaps, right? But honestly, that's kind of what seems to be happening. When you overlap, what you find what overlaps between them, and that's very profound, right? What they all say in common. But then you find what they say exclusively, their unique contribution to the whole. And I think if you combine all of those, and religion is just one example, so take all of that, then you do basically the same thing to political philosophy and to economics and to the various specialties, because we are living in the time when we've developed our specialties, right? This was the problem that he talked about, but you know, it's a double-edged problem. The great thing is they have such profound insights in such random spheres of excellence. You know, the computer scientists are contributing to philosophy like never before. You know, neuroscience is going crazy new places. Biology, there's a cutting edge guy, maybe he'll win a Nobel Prize, I don't know, Michael Levin, doing biological research and finding that you can do electrical programming of cells and that memory and intelligence isn't just present at the level of the nervous system. As you think of like a caterpillar that turns into a butterfly inside the cocoon, the caterpillar dissolves into pure liquid at some point. And yet when that liquid somehow turns into a butterfly and emerges, it preserves memories that the caterpillar learned prior to the transformation. So there's some sort of, we're beginning to open our ideas to more epigenetic conclusions about biology. So we're getting this time in history where social media and the almost global presence of internet at this point, and to some degree, the cultural and philosophical evolution that we're reaching right now, has led to this point where we can theoretically mine the best bits from each system of specialized knowledge. And that if you pick and choose, it's the era of the polymath, right? If you find the best bits, a friend of mine told me this is the definition of a philosopher too. Philosopher is somebody who studies a field just to come away with it, with the bits that can be most used to help them understand everything else. It's all a means to that end. And so, you study biology and people like different things about biology. But for me, it's all about Darwinism. And once you got Darwinism and you understand the interplay between selection pressures of any kind in any sphere, selection of any type, interplaying with something like random production of possibilities. And then you get universal Darwinism, right? You get mimetic Darwinism. You get Darwinism at the level of physics, where stars are stable, and so they propagate and they stay around, and other shapes come into being briefly and then wink out of existence. And so there's a type of selection pressure, and there's a type of Darwinism, and this applies at the physical level, the biological level, the level of thought, up and down all the layers in the hierarchy of reality. And nobody has been able to reliably sort of grip the whole tower of that at the same time. That's the Tower of Babel. Each of us has our failed attempt to cross the gap between heaven and earth. And at the lower level, we're dealing with a certain frequency of insights, big chunks. Think of like a tree trunk. It starts out like this, right? And then it branches. And so I need the insights from one discipline that are the most efficient for mediating between that first and second layer. Maybe I get this from, this insight from physics, this over here from biology. I have something that allows me to intuit from this frequency up to that one. And then up from that one to the one above that, so the tree branches fractally, like our nervous systems, like our blood systems, like everything at some level. As we're branching, I'm drawing upon different insights, and maybe they contradict each other. They come from different systems, but that doesn't have to be a problem. That's the postmodern issue. They say, abandon it if you can detect any flaw in it. If it has a flaw, you must abandon it. And it's like, you must. What are you talking about? You must. Where are you people getting your you must? You're the postmodernists. You're the ones that don't believe in musts. There's no must. You've pointed out a contradiction. Fine. There's no therefore. I can use it or not use it according to my fancy. And if it's the best insight, not according to truth necessarily, but according to giving my perceptive lens, the mediation between my consciousness and material reality, if I need to grip it at like these 7 layers between me and material reality, and I'm mixing insights from various disciplines, I just need a connection that reliably maintains itself from top to bottom. It's a continuous lightning bolt. You offer up a sacrifice on the materiality, and then heaven answers. But it's brief. Why is it brief? You want to make it stable. You want that to become a reliable circuit. You become a circuit that mediates between the conceptual realm and the material, right? And all of the universe has sort of been, in some sense, destined to arrive at this point, because first it was just light and energy, and then it coalesced into things like stars because of Darwinist reasons, selection, favored stars, and moons and planets, and then those did their thing, and then you get chemicals, and the chemicals propagate according to the laws which act upon which chemicals last and which don't, and which propagate themselves. And then the chemicals get to the biological level, and then life becomes more complex. And then at some point, our nervous systems become intelligent. And then at some point, the universe has created something that looks at itself not from the inside, but from the outside. And this is the fall. This is the separation. Because before that moment of intelligence, the generation of the ego, it's like the Eastern sages would say, all animals are enlightened. Until life gets smart enough, and then it gets too smart for its own good. But this is the story I think is missing. This is part of the conclusion I've come to from the cross comparing, is that the stories seem to make the same mistake, which is that they say, you think you're something material, bad, low. Here's this other better thing. Try to go from this to that. And, you know, in Nirvana, they say, and in Buddhism, they say, you want to get to Nirvana. And Nirvana means the blowing out of the candle, the extinguishing forever of the individual, of the personality. And in Christianity, you know, you have the dualism of good and evil. But it seems like none of these systems really have the answer. They all say they have the answer, and none of them reliably produce the transformations we need at the individual or at the group level. They can explain why it's not working and it's not their fault and they have the truth. But at the end of the day, they're trying to do it and it's not happening. We're still here. We're still at this point. It's not working. And so maybe what they're all getting wrong is that they don't appreciate the material thing, the separation, the source of suffering. Yes, it's the fall. Yes, it's the introduction of sin. That's the Christian paradigm. But it's there for a reason. Of course it's there for a reason. How could it not? What are you talking about? How in your paradigm is that not there for a reason? You just said it was created by someone on purpose. So it was created with this all in mind. And for some reason, that was okay with the boss in your paradigm. In Buddhism, they say something like, we're just a tragic accident, that we're aware of ourselves, but not perfectly. So there's what I am, and what I think I am. And then there's that distance between them. And then there's all the pain in there, right? Buddhism says, thus enters all suffering into the world. And it's like, yes. And you can get rid of the suffering by blowing out the fire. That's true. And your message is that we should sort of all do this. We should all do something like the deepest possible suicide, because then there wouldn't be any suffering. We should all go back to being pre-fallen, enlightened animals, that nobody's home inside, in some sense. Or not in the same sense. They make separation the enemy, in the individual the enemy, because it causes suffering. But maybe that's not an airtight case. Maybe the mere observation that taking anything seriously, believing anything matters, leaves you vulnerable to suffering. That's a good observation, but is that the end of your whole case for why we should now kill ourselves? That seems like that's a short distance from A to B here for such a big jump. Because Buddhism just starts with this. Literally the first thing they do, they presuppose it. So the Four Noble Truths, they're like, here it is. Life is suffering. There's a reason for that suffering. The reason is this. Here's how you get out. And the answer ends up being that you dissolve, you cease to be, you blow out the candle, you die, and everything hopefully does. And it's like, you didn't even make a case. You didn't even try to make a case. You didn't even say I should actually do it. You just said, here's suffering, here's where it comes from, here's how you can get rid of it. And not only have you not made a strong case, you haven't made any case. And given that this is literally your first teaching, it almost seems like you're sneaking in the case implicitly that the end of suffering is the only thing that matters, no matter what you could trade even the tiniest iota of suffering for. You know, if you could reshape the world and create heaven on earth, and all it would cost was a paper cut. And you're like, I don't believe in suffering. There's no, and you say, what about the world? What about the heaven on earth we could have? And you say, all is nothing, man. Like nothing matters. Nothing means anything. And why would I suffer? They don't just say, because getting rid of suffering is such a good goal.
Let's do one thing. Hunter.
Yeah. You want me to wrap up?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. So getting rid of suffering is a really great goal. It's such a great goal that you'd think it would basically be impossible to go too far with it. And I would agree with that. And that I would say the only possible way to take such a noble goal too far would be to go so far as to say that not only is it the greatest thing of value, but it is the only thing of value at any exchange rate at all. Nothing else gets traded for any amount of suffering. And that seems excessive. And it seems like it only kind of works. It's a hint at what we need, but it's not the full picture. And so maybe if we polymaths combine the insights, we can build not the Tower of Babel, but the ladder to heaven, that which reaches up and is received by that reaching down. And you get a continuous circuit. And maybe that's what's been missing. Maybe that's what the systems have aimed at, but only achieved sporadically. And maybe more precise, rigorous, clear thinking can make that less mystical and wooey and almost like a science, or have some element of science mixed in with it anyway. And maybe that's what we're missing.
Wow. All right, Hunter, I want to do justice to what you've done. This is just brilliant. So
Thank
I
you.
want to do justice to what you've done, because I want you to get feedback from everybody. So what I want to do is I want to just discuss everything that you've said. Okay.
Great.
Different people make comments. Let everybody make comments, and then you can go ahead and comment on anything that you've that you've heard. Okay, so I'm going to start.
They'll do the comments in a row, and then I'll wait to
in a
the
row.
end.
Yes, because
Okay,
what we
got it.
want to do is we want to have a conversation. We want to
Yeah.
have a conversation. Okay, so I'll start. I mean, it's just amazing. So firstly, it was just brilliant. And you're basically in the right place because almost everybody here agrees with this.
Amazing.
And working on this for the past maybe 3-4 years, something like that. Aspects of it.
Really?
So let me start in the most dramatic way. Okay, so I'm going to mute you. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep talking. So no, that's fine. You can pipe in a little bit. So let me start with something dramatic. What is the opposite of this being so afraid of suffering that you make that the central point? Okay, let's take something which is exactly opposite of that, and that is the cross. Okay,
indeed it is nirvana and the cross.
Cross, not just cross. You're saying being on the cross is the ideal of each moment. We're saying you're taking on everything that you've done in the past, everything that you're used to, everything is up for grab because you want to climb. It's saying that I want to transcend. So it's transcend, send is to climb, ascend is to climb, is beyond. So you're trying to go beyond. And by its nature, it is painful because you're giving, and you're willing to take that because you want to climb. So that will be, so it's very clear that, I'm offering that as an example of something which is like commonly held notion in Buddhism, commonly held notion in Christianity. They're exactly opposite. Okay. But there is some kind of integratability over there that we have to explore at some point. Right. So that's point number one. Secondly, what you talked about, what you started with, of saying that, we're really living in a very interesting time. And that's actually very true. This is for the first time that, thanks to the technology, thanks to the internet, thanks to immigration of people moving from one place to another. I live in this largest Chinese city outside of Asia, which is New York. We've got 1 million Chinese here. Okay. And we're very close. So it's like, so for me, China is not far. It's here. It's all around me. And so is Italy. And so basically there is a confluence. And now I'm presenting New York just as an example where it happened physically. But look at the people here. People are here from all over the place. And they're brought together by some kind of commonality of interest. But each of us bring their own background to bear on everything that we're going to say. Okay. At a very deep level, the conversation between cultures is just beginning. For example, here on 52 Living Ideas, we wanted to look at what is this religion thing? What has religion achieved? And so we looked at 3 traditions: Tao Te Ching from China, Bhagavad Gita from India, and Gospel according to John from the West. And we did 100 meetups each. 100 meetups each.
Just on the Gospel of John.
Yeah, 100 on Gospel of John, 100 on Bhagavad Gita, and 100 on Tao Te Ching. We dove deep into it because there is no, it's one of the big ideas of Buckminster Fuller is that of macro comprehensive and micro incisive. You can't be macro comprehensive without being micro incisive. You have to be able to dive deep into things and then keep expanding what you're going to bring to bear on that one point. And both of them, if you're doing it right, build on one another. So we went very deep up to a point where we had people, we have people translating Tao Te Ching, 3 different people just for our group, and going character by character and explaining what it means. It is really seeing the Chinese way of thinking come to life as best as it can, fully grasping that it is difficult to get grasp other cultures, but you pick up some things from it. And the other point that you made, which was excellent, is that what you're looking for is commonalities. On one hand, you can say, oh, all these 3 have this in common. In time, you're trying to listen very closely to unique voices. It is very difficult to listen because you always, when you look, you're looking from your own perspective, and you have to learn to put yourself in perspective on somebody else, to be able to see something that is completely outside of your philosophy, outside of your context. But if you are willing to do the work, you can do that. And then you pick up these things. So what you have is you have the commonality. It's like the Venn diagram. You have the intersection, and then you take elements of the things which are outside, which are integratable with the commonality. Not necessarily integrated in that form, because here we are talking about cultures, ways of thinking from different times, which were isolated each other, but you're able to put it together, and what you produce is something amazing. And you slowly develop a set of rules. The most powerful word you used is, I think, the word mediation. Okay, you have to be able to mediate between things. So that means, you don't, just because something is different from you, you don't, it is the old human tendency of our evolutionary heritage to say, oh, he's a stranger. Be aware, stay away, danger, okay? Exact opposite of that is the idea of mediation, where you rise above yourself and the other person to see what is common, what is different, where the opportunities lie of commonality of knowledge and value, and where the opportunities lie of complementarity of differences. And you come up with something together which is greater than what each could have done by themselves. And all of that is part of being a comprehensivist. I will come back and comment more, but let's go with Jeff, Joe, Maritza, and Caleb. Folks, what we're doing is that we're just commenting on what Hunter has said. You can talk a little bit about anything connected with it. And then after we have had a conversation about this, we'll go to the next presentation. So we will start with Jeff and Joe next. Jeff.
Oh, Shrikant, that's okay. When I raised my hand there, it's not so much to comment on Hunter's presentation.
Then what we will do, I'll come back
later. Yeah.
I'll come back to you, Jeff. Okay, let's go with Jeannie followed by Joe. Jeannie.
Well, I wanted to comment on what you said, Hunter, because in terms of the spaceship, and as bad as suffering is, I think the fear of suffering is even more hindering to us. And there's so much despair, and people are just willing to give up the spaceship. I mean, we have a chance, don't we? They're just, the idea of the doomsday, or, this is the way it's going to be, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's sad because that's such a loss of opportunity, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
So there are like a bunch of different things. Jeannie, I will disappoint you a little bit about the 8 degrees of freedom. I'm definitely not ready to brief everybody on that. So that would have been a little bit intense. But I mean, I have some ideas that I could share at some point as far as it relates to comprehensivity, but all the degrees of motion might be that's a presentation unto itself. But I very much appreciated what Hunter was actually sharing with us, and what Shrikant had actually just added in addition to that. The interesting thing, let me just start with the idea of suffering, because that seemed to have come up a couple of different times. And we need to really kind of figure out, what do we mean by suffering itself? And I think of things like the idea of, for those of you that may not be aware, there's something in Xenophon. And he talks about the idea that choice of Hercules. And Hercules is given 2 choices. And one is having a life of nothing but pleasure, where he goes down the path and everything is exactly as it wants it, and it's easy, and life is is just fulfilling his own desires. That's all it is. But then there's the other path, and that is the path of virtue. And that this path, that it involves great difficulty, challenges, and Hercules goes through an enormous number of challenges. But in those challenges, something very important is found, and that's purpose. There's a meaning to things. On the other road, there's no meaning at all. So that the idea that we're embracing our challenges is actually something that it gives us meaning, and it gives us resilience. So I think that that's where we start to have a coherent way of thinking about the world, and start to reframe even the idea of what suffering even means. And that's a very important point. And how you reframe that is very important. Now, coming back to some other ideas, is that really quickly, I think that it's important that what you said, how postmodernists look at things as a complete rejection of the past. This is bad, everything else is bad, and they draw this sharp distinction between the past and now. And I've actually thought about this, and I literally was just in a conversation about this. The idea that I think is really the problem is not necessarily only postmodernists, but it's dogmatic thinking, that there's an absolute one way to go, and that's it. And so here's the point of comprehensivity, that it's not about one way. And actually Hunter spoke to this beautifully, is the idea of a comprehensivist is that they embrace the discomfort. They take the choice of actually getting out of their comfort zone, and they find meaning in that. And when they find the meaning they find the beauty, they find themselves, and they can embrace all these philosophies of life, all these various philosophies, and they can take the best from them and create something for themselves. And it's internal and authentic. And I think what happens is that, to another point that you had made, is the thing that these traditions all teach us is the importance of humility. And I say that because we become too smart. You mentioned, you said, we become so smart. And I think that this is very true, that sometimes, and I had a conversation, I had some interesting conversations that relate to these things, that we look at it and say, well, you know, if I have a predisposition to do something harmful to myself and it's bad, I know to correct that loop. It's an immediate feedback loop. So if I'm somebody who has a predisposition to alcohol and I drink, that's not good, right? And therefore, I get the feedback of that right away. And I know to correct that, and I know to change my behavior. Some people can't, but they do. You know, some do. And the ability to change that is important. However, I think that there's something deeper there. What you were saying, and let me link this back to the idea of being too smart, is being too smart is things are going really, really well for me. And I have the answers. I know the answers. I can tell you the answers. That's the problem. And that's what comprehensivists seek to think. There's an element of humility that is absolutely essential when it comes to comprehensivity. And that humility actually allows us to understand and embrace differing perspectives and get outside of our comfort zone. So the importance of that, if I may, just finish, that the importance of that is that we don't necessarily subscribe to just the material success, the success of being right, but actually we start to celebrate the things that where we're wrong. And when we can do that, we can understand that we're fallible and we're wrong. We can look at the various traditions and take from that the best of what they have to offer, as opposed to just resist what they have to offer, because what they have, in the sense that if we just reject, that's based off of the fact that there's an element of hubris in our own sense. So what I'm saying is that you can become the very thing that you actually loathe by saying there's this dogma, this absolutism approach. And then once you have that humility, there's a built-in approach to your learning. You can take the best of everything and the best everybody has to offer, and you're okay with it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I really like what you said. The way I like to think of it is the dance between the infinite and the finite. You should never forget that you are finite and that you're pursuing the infinite. And there is so much more. And you're go ahead.
That's humility in its own right. I mean, so right. You realize you're infinite. I mean, you're a speck, a little blue speck on the scope. So the idea, the infinite, and then yourself. And that puts things into perspective and allows us to have the humility that allows us to then actually progress.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. So absolutely, I mean, basically, there is this dance between the infinite and the finite. And you know that whatever you understand is the best that you have. At the same time, you have to be willing to throw it away at the first sign that it contradicts with something else, because that's the only way to grow. That's the only way to grow. And you have to have that love for the world or for the universe as such. And you have to have the confidence, almost like a childlike confidence, of taking the steps, knowing fully well that you're going to stumble and you're going to get up and you're going to keep going. Thank you. We're going to go with Caleb next, followed by Maritza and Mona. Go ahead, Caleb.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Hunter. Like a lot of what you shared resonated with me. There are a lot of concepts that I've been grappling with for some time too. The two that really stood out, I suppose that are really at the forefront of my mind that I wanted to touch on was that idea of Darwinism kind of as, a universally applied concept. Uh, and I think so like when we think about, history, how we got from, our, humblest beginnings to where we are now, and how our thinking, has evolved over that time. What it seems to me is it's kind of an approximation to, whatever the final, number is supposed to be, so to speak. So, think of, the mathematical concept of, an asymptote. The number pi is a perfect example of that. You could just, if you're trying to define, a circle, you could just say, okay, the ratio of its diameter to, the radius is 3.14. But, you calculate out a little further, you add another digit, another layer of approximation gives you a better representation of the circle. And you take that further out you go, or the greater you approximate, the more well-defined the circle becomes. But you can't, I mean, as we've seen, you could calculate pi out to as many digits as you want, but you can never perfectly define the circle. And I think that's what human history has been to this point, in a sense. It's, when we think about what religion has done, what it's allowed, what it's given to us, as a species, one way I think of thinking about it is greater and greater approximations to the best representation of reality as we experience it. When we think about the mistakes that, we made, obviously, we haven't gotten it all right, but that idea of being willing to, being open to looking at things from different perspectives, taking the things, keeping the things that, seem to be, most true, in a sense, those ideas that, haven't fallen by the wayside. There must be something there that allows them to persist. It's the reason why, they've stood the test of time, where, other ideas haven't, they've died off. And it's because I think through our lived experience, we've embodied those things that, are quote unquote true, that do have, a nigh, universal application. And the things that, haven't worked as well, we've been able to cast off. And in doing so, we're getting a better and better approximation of, what we actually experience as reality. So, that's something that I think you touched on very well. The other thing is that idea of suffering and it as something that's desirable in the right context. There's the idea of, pain. I think the best way to describe maybe what Buddhism is, it's what it's trying to approximate is pain without purpose. That is, that's true suffering, so to speak. Because you're experiencing, your conscious experience is unpleasant and you yield nothing from them. And I think what Christianity has been able to do very well, as far as a world model, a way of, perceiving the world, of approximating reality, is it's really done a very good job of perpetuating the idea that you want to pick up your cross. You don't want to be given the cross. You don't want to carry it against your will. Meaning and purpose and progress comes when it's a voluntary decision. You have to choose to pick up your cross, and that can be, anything. Again, it's that, the idea of, taking concepts, applying them at one level, and then scaling them up, to ever increasing levels of abstraction. You could take that with the simplest of things, and you find that it's applicable even at greater scales. It's applicable at the micro level, but you can expand that out to the macro level and still see that, that concept, that, that works well as an approximation of, the model that you're trying to, determine. So yeah, those are the two things, just, the universality of some concepts, why they've stood the test of time, and that as a demonstration of how well they approximate truth and reality. And the second being the utility of suffering when it's voluntary, you choose to pick up your cross.
Wonderful. Caleb, that was excellent. And, glad to have you here. So it's just wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mona, followed by Maritza. Mona, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. I wanted to touch upon a little bit on the idea that we learn also through insights, not necessarily just through accepted rules of how things work in the world. Hunter was mentioning insights that you get from different fields that could be relevant and kind of expanding like a tree. I do want to talk about a little about what I do know in connection to Buddhism. I was just listening on my way from work to the works of Saint Teresa of the Avila, and then it was almost as if I was listening to my Buddhist teacher. So I thought about the commonality of this urge towards progressing down this path in a willing way. So that's what I appreciated also from Caleb, what he said, that we've got to take the cross willingly. And I thought about Buddhism, how they don't force anyone to go down that path. They say it's just something you have to choose. You have to want it. They don't teach you anything at all about the world other than what they do, and the rest is going to be your discovery. And this idea that the fact that they don't teach you everything, that doesn't mean that there is nothing else to be learned in the process. So in the process of going towards the relief of suffering for yourself or for the others, then something wonderful happens. Like there's an opening in the heart that allows the possibility for increased compassion, for increased wisdom and understanding of life that happens sort of as a byproduct of the practice. So it's not just the relief of suffering, but how do we integrate it all into the all of life? Like compassion, not just for yourself, and relief of suffering, not just for yourself, but for others. And in the presence of increased compassion, increased wisdom happens as well. So there's a synergy at work, not just relief of suffering and the cross per se. That's what I wanted to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Mona, for bringing that up, because what happens is that each of these great traditions have things in them, and each of them is actually very deep. So for example, Buddhism is part of the Indian tradition, and the Indian tradition is focused on consciousness, and many of its core ideas are really about what is going on in terms of concentration. What do you pay attention to? What do you focus on? What is the consequence of what you focus on? And now I don't know if I can relate the two. I'm not familiar with Buddhism, but I'm very much familiar with the Indian, the Hindu context. And there, what is held? So the question I'm trying to ask is, what is the, now this is not going to be true to Buddhism because I don't know Buddhism, but I'm just talking about suffering as it is there in Hinduism. And I think it is very similar. My guess is that it's going to be very similar with Buddhism, and the suffering or pain or death as is seen in the New Testament, for example. There, this root of suffering, the root of death is the focus on fruit, not the true vine from which the fruit comes, nor the root from which the sap flows. When you get attached to the fruit, that is the source of death and suffering. It is when you're sitting at the foot of the cross, and instead of looking up and seeing and looking through the word to the source, the Father, you start looking down. You start looking and saying, oh, look, you are the fruit, basically. And you're saying, that's all I want to focus on. Or worse, stuff that I have made, worse, stuff that other people have made, or worse, what other people think of the stuff that I have. All of that is taking your attention away. The primary thing, currency you have is attention. You're taking the attention away from the infinite, from the transcendental, from the truth, beauty, and goodness, which is universal, which is going to lead you, which actually, just like Solomon, it's like, all I want is wisdom. And because you've said all you want is wisdom, you will have everything. But moment you change and you say, no, now I want wealth and I want a large number of wives, you're starting to look down, and then you lose both that and the wisdom at the same time. So there is a lot of similarity here, though the formulations are different. Thank you, Mona. Great point. Next up is Maritza.
Hi. So I am delighted that I can actually, I had a quote from earlier and I was like, oh, I'm going to wait. But because of something Mona said, I'm actually not going to. So this is a Buckminster Fuller quote. He says, "It is not for me to change you. The question is, how can I be of service to you without diminishing your degrees of freedom?" To me, this quote from him like sums up what Hunter has been saying, what Caleb has said, what Mona has said, what you have said, Shrikant, Joe even. And so I really like seeing all the interweaving parts from what Hunter was saying. I want to speak to an aspect that others haven't quite touched upon yet. He talks about Darwinism briefly. He said Darwinism and Buckminster Fuller, and I'm delighted to hear him mention that, because I think most would not consider that something that you would compare or contrast. I have actually spent quite a bit of time looking at it because I think Darwin is very interesting, and I was a little stuck on him since I actually found myself in the Galapagos, and it actually, if you do comparisons, it's kind of surprising how much you can see the two. So the idea of comprehensive learning. So just as a species must adapt to survive and to thrive in changing environments, which is what Darwinism is proposing, so too learners have to adapt to knowledge, technologies, and societal needs. And so comprehensive learning is emphasizing the importance of developing adaptive learning strategies that enable individuals to continuously acquire and apply new knowledge and new skills throughout their lives. And to me, I hear that the same thing being mentioned about the evolutionary tract within the concept of Darwinism. There's also the variation and diversity. Darwinism is highlighting like the importance of genetic variation and diversity within populations. And comprehensive learning is, emphasizing the value of diverse perspectives, diverse skills, diverse approaches to problem solving, right? So I think, I'm seeing the dualities there where they can work together. And then, I would even put the concept of natural selection with the concept of competency development. So, in Darwinism, you're thinking about how natural selection is favoring traits that improve survival and reproduction. And then in comprehensive learning, there you can see this similar thing in the way, educational and career opportunities here tend to, favor individuals who have the most developed competencies that are most needed in a community or a society. But comprehensive learning is aiming to equip us lifelong learners with a broad set of skills and knowledge that are relevant and adaptable to the needs for our modern world that we find ourselves in. And to that point, the again, the most famous thing about Darwinism, right? Darwin's concept of survival of the fittest. How would we look at that and see that in agreement with Buckminster Fuller concepts? To me, I would think, I don't see a contradiction here. I see the concept that continuous learning is the idea of continuously learning and adapting in order to succeed in an ever-changing landscape. So to me, that's kind of a very similar definition to the survival of the fittest. So, I saw those parallels while Hunter was chatting. So I wanted to put them here on the table just for those of you to hear. Hopefully it makes sense to you. I just wanted to.
Thank you, Maritza. I'm going to bring in two other thinkers that we have studied in detail. One is Julian Jaynes, and second is Jordan Peterson and his maps of meaning. Okay. Jordan Peterson puts it very beautifully. You have to, in order to live, you have to let your wrong ideas die. Okay. Because if you get attached to them, the whole purpose. So let me keep it for a moment and let's go to Julian Jaynes. So Julian Jaynes holds that consciousness is a simulation of, you're trying to actually simulate what the world is like and what you should be doing in the world. So your ideas are simulations of the world. And they are the maps. They are maps. They are not the territory. So what you want is, you want to be loyal to the territory. And you want to throw away the maps that are conflicting with the territory. You want to look at, if somebody's telling you, giving you another map, you have to check and see if it captures the territory better, or if you can find a combination of those maps which is going to capture the territory better. You don't have to take all of it, but you have to see what it is. It is, what Jordan Peterson says is that it is painful to let your ideas die because they become part of you. It is like amputating your hand. It feels like that, but it is not, because that is how you continue to live in spite of being a limited creature, having all kinds of biases like the confirmation bias and all of that. All right. So Hunter, we've given you some, our comments, our thoughts about this. I thought I made an exception because we have a very flexible format, and I try to judge what is valuable. I thought that what you said was incredibly good, and I wanted to give a chance for everybody to give you feedback. And I would love to hear what you thought of everything that was said, anything that you want to comment on for about 5-10 minutes if you want, and then we will go to the next presenter. Go ahead, Hunter.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So the first thing, when you mentioned, I guess I had this idea that as part of the cross-sharing of ideas here, when you described Buddhism's approach to suffering as something worth reversing, like instead of staying away from the bad, poisonous thing, we embrace it, and then to some degree we redeem it. We don't get rid of it, but we find a way not to replace it, but to add to it in a way that justifies its existence. And I thought it would be funny to apply this to the idea of cultural appropriation and be like, no, take cultural appropriation and then turn it around exactly opposite and have everybody try to learn all the best things that aren't in their own culture from everybody else. Instead of being afraid to imitate each other, maybe we want to encourage mutual admiration and exchange of virtue of any kind, wherever it may be found.
Hunter, let's go back and forth a little bit. One of my favorite,
okay, yeah.
One of my favorite singers is Ella Fitzgerald. Nice. And one thing she said is that I stole everything. I stole all music, because she took in all the music, and then not a passive thing, but then she figured out a way of incorporating all of that and letting it flow through her. Go ahead.
Beautiful. Yeah. Somebody said about Ella Fitzgerald that even if she didn't know what to do with her voice, it was just a magnificent instrument. You know, you just read the phone book with that thing. All right. So you also emphasized the importance of mediation. And what that made me think of is that we need different groups to have different philosophies and different codes and different ways of perceiving reality and different virtue systems. You know, the soldiers, the priests, the workers, the politicians, they each need their individual way of doing things that, you know, they disagree with each other, and that's okay. But we need an additional layer that can coexist with each of the different ones and then act as a mediator between them. And so this was the idea of Christ in the Christian tradition, that, you know, you can have your soldierly ideas and I can have my farmer ideas, but we both share something in common. And in fact, we share it with literally everybody. Everybody in the whole land is devoted to the same religion. And we all, if we need to resolve a dispute between us, you know, I can appeal to my farmer's values and you're just going to poo-poo them. And you're going to talk about being a soldier and I'm going to say, that's not how you do it. But if we both talk about being a Christian, now we have some common ground to work out differences between our codes. And so maybe we need something like that, which doesn't ask any group to abandon what they've got. We want to improve what you've got. We want to bring out the best in it. You don't have to stop being anything you've ever been. It's just that we want you to additionally have this layer of whatever I think of it in terms of metamodernism, whatever that cultural layer is, you know, we need to figure it out and design it. But once we have it all in common, then we use it to resolve differences between us.
That's very good. So let me talk about two things. One is the mediator. So the idea is that you're kind of treating other person as a child of God. And you're giving a basic respect to the other person as a child God. In the Indian tradition, it's called namaste.
Right.
Namaste means the God in me greets the God in you. And moment you say that,
right,
and not just say it, but moment you actually, both people feel that from the core of their being, you're saying the core is the same. Now it gives a base for doing integration, regardless of all the differences. Go ahead.
Yeah, that reminds me of, and my understanding is you seem to know a lot more about the Hindu and the Indian traditions, so maybe you can help me understand this better. But my shallow understanding of one of the Hindu ideas is that my consciousness and all of us are something like dreams in the mind of a sleeping God. And that the God imagines, you know, all the possible rocks and planets and looks at that. And then the God imagines simple life forms and looks at those, and then more complex life forms. And at some point it produces one of me, and it's looking at what I'm experiencing and it sees that I'm talking about it. And it's like, oh, that's hilarious. This is one of the ones, you know, it looks in some windows of perception and they're just doing whatever their thing is. But you look in this one, and it's almost like it's trying to look back through the fourth wall and be like, oh, hey, you're always watching. Can we talk? Can we dialogue? And the question is, does the mind of God care that there are these interesting shapes trying to talk to it? Does it develop a special affection? You know, they're more interesting because if it talks back, it's talking to itself. And so then it's like surprising itself in some way. It's using the separation to be like, I didn't know I was going to do that. How do you not know what your own self is doing? It's like, well,
okay. What I want to do is I want to take it along slightly different angle, because I know Christianity at this point a little bit better than Hinduism. The way put the same thing in Christianity. You know, God has created all these things. Okay. And man is created in the image of God. what does it mean to be in the image? That you have the faculty essentially of concentration, will, understanding. And suddenly you have these, at the same time, you have free will in the sense that you can choose to focus on God or not. So you have that grandeur in your own being. And then you have all these people either interacting or not interacting. And that is the Hinduism, the thing about that, not that I don't want to talk about it, it's just that each of these cultures like India, China, or the West is very rich. And there are all these different views. Just like in the West, we have Plato and Aristotle. You have different versions of Christianity, which are very different from each other. So there are different views in all of that. So I'm a little bit lost when I go through it. What I have is I have the Bhagavad Gita, which is like the base of it, and that's all that I have. I don't have the full tree of all the things there. But go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So onto some of Joe's points. There was this idea. I love this idea with Hercules, because I think Hercules is basically the spirit of that fire that Buddhism blows out. That's that spirit. You kind of see it in Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think you see it in people like Jim Carrey. It's an American flavored thing to some degree. The the fireworks of it. But it occurred to me, there's this idea that suffering equals pain times resistance. This is more from the Buddhist ideas. But usually the Buddhists are like, okay, so just sit there and don't resist it. But you, Joe, talked about the idea of embracing it. It's like, well, embracing is also not resisting. So if suffering minus resistance equals pain, but not suffering, what do I get when I get suffering plus minus resistance plus whatever embrace has on top of lack of resistance? What's the output of that? And it seems to me that it's some kind of transformative layer between me and the outer world, or what I think of as the outer world. That it is in the embrace of the pain of life that we generate the friction necessary to transform ourselves and the environment mutually.
That's a great point. What I want to do is I want to bring in one more thinker that we have looked at, and that is, Carl Jung on one hand and Carl Rogers. The point that you made actually right now, the closest one is Carl Rogers, because what he's saying is that, both Carl Jung and Carl Rogers thought that human beings are magnificent beings. And they also notice that most people are not that happy. And they don't really live up to that potential. And they both ask the question, why? Okay. And the way in which Carl Rogers answers it, now this is my kind of dramatic way of putting it. I think both of them kind of have a version of it. He says, you have the core, which is magnificent. But in addition to that, you have these false ideas about yourself that undercut you at every level. And so you have this routine inside you, which is undercutting you. And then on the top of that, you're afraid of the people. So you are wearing these giant shields to protect yourself from other people so you don't get damaged. Okay. So there are these magnificent creatures with this algorithm undercutting themselves that they have, and these shields. So Carl Rogers says, okay, what's the solution to this? And his idea is actually, it's just so simple. He's saying authentic relating. It's like if you are open to another human being, what happened, and you're genuinely curious about who this person is, okay? Something magical happens. Firstly, those shields start to melt down a little bit. Okay, so you're not kind of not losing everything that is coming in to you. And the second thing is that you notice that the other person does not have the same undercutting mechanism as you. Not that they are better, okay, mind you. It's just that they're different. And then say, wait a minute, he is not held back by this particular thing. Why am I held back by that? See, you would never think of that because those things are you regard as part of you. And suddenly you realize that you don't have to be that. And, we have the potentiality, human potentialities. It's very large. And we get fixated and ossified in various ways, internally and in interaction with other people. So just that authentic relating, that is the same as namaste, same as saying the other person is a child of God. Let me deal with them. Let me see who they are. Let me play. Okay, that is a very powerful way of reducing that. Go ahead, Hunter.
Yeah, the same point I think touches on what Caleb was saying, with the emphasis on the idea of picking up the cross rather than something like accepting it being handed to you or something. And that's what Peterson emphasizes with his voluntary confrontation with the suffering, or might say something like the resistance of being. And you touched on Peterson later too and talked about maps of meaning. And maps of meaning is actually maybe where I first started to glimpse this idea of connecting across the layers, because he lays out a hierarchy of like captured, distilled truth. When it starts out and it just comes out of the chaos, it comes out of what you don't know and don't perceive, and now it's there and you've perceived it. And like the very first level is just observation. And then like the very first attempt to sort of try to get your hand on the thing is something like imitation. And then you move from imitation to like distilled versions of imitation, where you develop, like imagine you watch somebody do a punch. And so you develop a specific motion, right? You've got this distilled action. But what does it mean? And then you start to ritualize it. You act out, there's the punch, and then there's some sort of response, somebody falls over or something. And say, why are we acting this out? We do the thing and the fall. What is it pointing at? Why does this capture my attention? And then you further distill it down to like a drama. So now there's a dialogue. There's like somebody said something, and then there was a punch. And why there was a punch has something to do with the social context. And then you further distill it down to like literature. And now you've got just in abstract words, there was a billion details about what happened that I could write about, and I'm just going to write these 6. And it's like, this is what matters. And then you get it down to abstract wisdom, right? Precise language that describes not what is true in the particular case, but is theoretically true universally. So yeah, Peterson has this idea, and I think, again, yeah, this is what I would describe. I would relate it to the ladder to heaven, which is this idea that if we combine our abilities to apprehend all the truth we have, some of it we can only represent dramatically or literally or abstract language, or in some cases mere imitation. But just because Buddhism will say the one true perspective is the highest one. But I'm saying, hold that perspective, hold the next one below that, hold the next one below that, and the next one and the next one, all simultaneously, despite the fact that they're supposedly contradictory. Why talk about biology when it's all explicable in terms of chemistry? Why talk about chemistry when it's all just physics? It's like, no. Have all the layers. This is a pyramid, right? It's layers that are becoming diminished in one degree, becoming, for example, less accurate, but becoming more comprehensive. And if you have the full stack, where on the one hand you have full perfect truth as much as you can get it, but it's so close to emptiness, because how many truths can you really prove? And on the other hand, you have something like complete undifferentiation between possibilities. And then you build the pyramid between them, and then some sort of pyramid builds itself back to you. And then there's this, that's Michelangelo's painting, where Adam's finger reaches up to God and God's reaches down to man's.
Wonderful. Hunter, this was great.
Yeah.
I want to give a chance for if anybody else has presentations ready. But Hunter, this is really, really brilliant and just incredibly good to have you here. please send me a meetup message. Would be happy to do a full meetup on
Oh,
anything
amazing.
to talk about. We are a very kind of open forum, and we're looking for people. I mean, the ideas that you're talking about, the entire theme here is collaborating for comprehensivity. It's CJ's idea, and the core part is that you can't be comprehensivist without collaborating.
Brilliant. I love the collaborative angle. I think that's what we need to talk each other into doing what we know we should be doing.
Exactly.
So that
Exactly.
we're letting the ball drop to some degree out in the
Yes.
world stage.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hunter. All right, folks? I decided to take I took the decision of saying, look, what Hunter had to say was so amazing that I wanted to make sure that everybody got to comment on it, and Hunter got feedback on it. And but if there is anybody else who wants to make any presentation on the comprehensivity of Buckminster Fuller, please go ahead and type in an exclamation mark. You can do that, or we can continue the conversation, whatever you prefer. If you want to do a presentation, type in a P in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Otherwise, we can continue the discussion. I want to go back to the theme of Buckminster Fuller. Jeannie, go ahead.
Well, I had also prepared something on the second question that came up in the video, and that was, what is the mission of Bucky Fuller? And in the video, CJ says, well, he kind of defers. He says, well, that really is in Guinea Pig B. And so I went to Guinea Pig B, and I have a little bit that I was going to read out about Bucky Fuller's mission. And the whole Guinea Pig B is basically about his mission. So I'm just taking small parts of it. But this was always important to him. He said, I am an average, healthy human being. I am also a living case history of a thoroughly documented half-century search and research project designed to discover what, if anything, an unknown, moneyless individual with a dependent wife and a newborn child might be able to do effectively on the behalf of all humanity that could not be accomplished by great nations, great religions, or private enterprise. A little bit later. I started out at 32 to make that experiment. I saw there was nothing stopping me from thinking about the total planet Earth and thinking realistically about how to operate it on an enduringly sustainable basis at the magnificent human passenger spaceship that it is. Later, okay. I am overwhelmed by the evidence of an eternally existent and operative, omnicompetent, greater intellect than that of human beings. And then he goes on, and he always tells this story about he had decided to commit suicide, and he considered himself a throwaway person, which really kind of makes me laugh at this point. But there are many people in our world that do feel that they are throwaways. So, you shouldn't take it too blissfully. But so he, instead of committing suicide, he decided to commit egocide. And that was when he decided to devote himself to humanity. I am going to commit myself completely to God and to the realization of God's apparent intent to assign semi-divine functioning to an as yet to qualify for such functioning humanity. To qualify for such local universes, evolutionary adjustings, humans themselves must intelligently discover and spontaneously employ their designed-in potentials and themselves realize the sustainable success of their evolutionary scheduled physio-economic potential. And then to end it, he sort of went on about the importance of creating artifacts. And I wanted to bring in another great thinker, which is Marshall McLuhan. So instead of thinking artifacts, I mean, Bucky Fuller really did think artifacts. He built a car, he built numerous homes, you know, he was into building things. But in Marshall McLuhan, you begin to think of everything as media and everything in the way it communicates. And we're living in a kind of a post-materialist world in many ways, and that the things we create as artifacts, we need to broadly think of them. So something like 52 living ideas would be an artifact. It's a way of communicating one thing to another thing. So I just wanted to bring up what Bucky Fuller's mission statement was.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody else have any presentations or any comments? Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really interesting meetup on a number of different levels, and I really actually appreciate it. Sorry about that. Appreciate everybody's actually their input. And you know, one thing I want to make sure that is that I don't glorify the idea of suffering either. You know, that there are people that are suffering that, you know, it's very hard. And so it's very difficult to deal with it. I'm just saying that, you know, there is an approach, it makes it worse to resist. And I think that that's very important to at least call attention to. Sometimes when we think of suffering, we think of it in terms of in the intellectual realm and getting outside our comfort zones and challenging our ideas. But I find that exhilarating. I don't necessarily find that to be totally uncomfortable. Maybe it's uncomfortable in the process of being wrong a lot, but that part, but not necessarily in the sense that where it would be like somebody really going through a difficult time. But I do think that there's this element of what does, and Caleb, I brought this idea that the
Joe,
transformative.
would you like to make a presentation on some topic today?
No, I'm good.
Okay, let me go ahead and make a
great
presentation.
topic, because this is I think that this conversation is actually so good that I would rather not. So
then let's finish all the presentations and then we will have a general discussion. Is that okay?
Sure. Is there anybody giving a presentation?
Yep, I'm giving a presentation.
Oh, all right. Well,
okay. What I want to do is, you know, I want to celebrate the kind of comprehensivity of Buckminster Fuller. Okay, because that's something that we have to do. You know, we've learned so much from him. And now the question is, how do we do this? I think the best thing that I have is what Kurt McNamara did. You know, he has this beautiful flow chart, not flow chart, but he has a mind map of Bucky's ideas. You know, what are the greatest ideas of Bucky? And then we can look and see what is it about them that makes Bucky comprehensivist. Okay. So he has, at a very high level, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then each of those 5s are further divided up. Okay. So the first one is the idea of systems. Okay, thinking in terms of systems. And again, you know, I think that is really heart of his comprehensivism, because he thinks of everything as systems. The second category that he had is the category of system change. Okay, so where he's showing you that dynamism of systems, like he's not looking at operating manual for spaceship Earth of saying, here is the Earth. No, he's saying, how does this change? What should we be doing with it? So he has a whole set of ideas. I want to just show it to you here. This is the flow chart that I'm talking about. It's there. We've done a whole meetup on that. So I'm just going to talk through it, because you get a sense of how he is comprehensivist, because Kurt did such a good job. He's writing a whole book on the work of, ideas of Buckminster Fuller. The next one is that of power of the individual. Okay, power of the individual is a very large theme in Bucky. He's saying one individual can change the world. Okay, that, he keeps coming back to. The fourth one is power of design. Okay, so the idea of design is a very deep idea. And the last one is that of shape of nature. Okay, we've done a lot of work on shape of nature, with people like Strupy, where we built all kinds of polyhedra, of tetrahedrons, and we built our own dodecahedrons and all of that stuff. And to actually understand the structure, like seeing the tetrahedron as the structure, like the base structure out of which other things are built, I think that's a very deep idea. Now you can you can dive in further and say, systems have shape. They are distinct parts of the universe. They have synergy. So there are all of these ideas of synergy, and when you go to system change, for example, there is precession, the unpredicted effects of what you're trying to do. Trim tab, or sideways effects. Trim tab, points of the maximum leverage. In terms of power of the individual, you have a whole bunch of things. But this range of saying not just about systems, but about individuals. Not just about systems, but systems change. Deep thinking about design itself. And, new ideas on shapes of nature. I thought this was a very good way of looking at Bucky. Of all the things that you saw in the last year of our meetups on Bucky, we did 50 to 80 meetups on Bucky. What is it that you learned about comprehensivity of Bucky, of Buckminster Fuller, as a result of that? So I'll put that as a question on the table. You can spend up to 2 minutes talking about what is it that really stood out for you in the comprehensivity of Bucky as a result of looking at all these great people coming and talking about Buckminster Fuller. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to comment. We'll start with Maritza.
For me, what I learned from all the different people coming, it was the value of seeing it as you build it approach. You mentioned Strupy, and we also had oh no, I'm forgetting his name. Yes, just seeing the conceptualization of some of the mathematical concepts brought to just the basic day-to-day was really enlightening for me. And it really, more so than many other events we had here on Buckminster Fuller, it just brought home the day-to-day where really is. There's so much you can apply it to.
Marissa, do you mind? I just want to show you some of the things, some of the products that we made together. Like this is with Strupy and trying to make, icosahedrons here. This is something that Tom Miller gave me. This is the, how you can use these basic forms in architectural design. So go ahead, Maritza.
No, that's perfect. I don't have any of my props. I'm not home.
Okay.
But yes, yeah, we had a lot of fun working on those and building them and learning, what your hands can do. And the idea of putting it to your taking the thoughts in your head and putting them to shape physically is pretty fantastic. So those would be the ones that I think I learned the most and kind of surprised me the most. It was unexpected.
Wonderful. All right. If nobody else, Joe, what did you learn?
I think it's hard to pinpoint one thing that Bucky has taught, but unity is plural at minimum too. I mean, by far.
Mhm.
That non-zero sum gains exist in this world,
Mhm.
and that everything kind of stems from that, the self and other, and it kind of gets to what we were talking about. And so how change even occurs, what you're talking about with systems. Well, what is a system? I mean, that is essentially it requires two. And so from that, we can kind of build off of everything. So I think that that's the most powerful concept that Bucky talks about. What a minimum system is as well is the other most powerful concept, because that's the tetrahedron.
Mhm.
So that's not necessarily thinking about things in threes. So, I mean, and just to Jeannie's point, from the personal level that Bucky has shared, when he was, at a point where he was, making a decision whether or not to continue his life. You have a couple decisions to make in that situation. And what Bucky did was he changed his life to help humanity. And I think that there are a lot of people that can either allow their suffering, as we talked about, overtake them. It can make them very angry, or it could lead them to actually change the world.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Katie. Katie, what did you get from all the Bucky meetups?
Well, I love that you reminded us of systems, because that reminded me of this great meetup that we had on bottom up change and top down change in systems that I really just loved. We were brainstorming how to change systems. And then I was enjoying what Hunter was saying with different countries. And I was thinking of a country as a siloed system, and how, we're all in an earth. Nature is one I do think that is the way how a lot of problems originate, is people think, oh, you're in that system over there, I don't have to think about that because we're siloed. But a lot of things are more connected sometimes in ways that you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this distinction between siloed world and interconnected network world, I think that's a really the core difference between what we've been talking about. All right. So now let's see. I don't know. This is such a great meetup that I'm reluctant to stop. But let's see what's coming up. So I think we are going. I think these meetups are going very well. We are really doing breaking new grounds with the discussions, with the presentations. I really like the presentations. Maritza, what do you think? How are we doing on this series?
I think it's going great. I love seeing different people come and present. And it's something that you actually said to me years ago now, years ago, right? It stuck with me, and I see it in action here. The idea that the best way to learn is to teach. And technically, whenever you bring a presentation, what you're doing is you're teaching us all a little aspect, or teaching us a different perspective of something that we've all walked with together. And so I love that. It's my favorite aspect of it when people come, even, and I really like that we have an informalness here where we don't expect the presentation to be a super polished PowerPoint slide, bring a prop, even just talk. And we're still getting the robustness and the richness of a new idea presented to us. And I really am enjoying that. I think it's adding something. We're all learning in a different way to see CJ's work.
Wonderful. Hunter, can I ask you a few questions?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Hunter, I was quite blown away by everything that you said. So can you tell us a little bit about the range of your interest? What do you study? What are you interested in?
I'm interested in comparative religion, philosophy. I'm interested in physical health development, psychology and shadow work and that kind of thing. Music, love music.
Who are some of your favorite thinkers of all times?
Favorite thinkers. I mean, I've taken inspiration from Jung for sure, and Peterson. I think Peterson's probably what got me kicked off on pragmatism, which was sort of very important for me to sort of branch outside of where I'd gotten so far.
Okay. Here is an idea.
Okay.
On Friday, we do Meetup on Jung.
I really don't know that much Jung though. Like,
you don't know much Jung. Okay.
No, not really. I mean, I superficially.
All right. So Jung, Peterson, go on.
Yeah, Jung, Peterson. I guess Eliezer Yudkowsky. He's not a.
I'm very familiar with Eliezer. I've read H.P. Moore and everything.
Nice. Yeah. So very much that. My progression basically went from religious to rationalist in the Yudkowsky way. That Peterson sort of broke me into pragmatism, and from there I don't know. I'm not sure who to. Everybody, I mean, not really everybody, but certainly the religious leaders and the religious systems. Like I don't even know that much about necessarily what the Buddha or Muhammad taught, but I see what the religion does. I see the practices. I see lots of things that make sense. So in that sense.
Excellent. All right. So, so look forward to your kind of continued participation. And if we can come up with some things that you want to present on, you're always welcome to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Let me see if Joe wants you want to make a brief comment about suffering. You want to continue?
No, the only comment I actually, sorry. So based off of everything that we've been talking about, there's obviously 10 different things that we could go into. No, suffering, I think I covered pretty closely. I mean, I just would say the transformative power is there, and that comes from the embrace. And so as to what Hunter was saying a little bit later is then how does that transformation actually then occur, right? It occurs through realizing that other people are suffering around you, and that is exactly as the hubris that it kind of can't cures. So the idea that you had brought up, Shrikant, a little bit earlier with that something must die in order for, there's a Karl Popper, and you talked about Jordan Peterson's comment, but there's also, Karl Popper that talks about the idea something must die inside you in order for it to live, in order for you to live, to truly live. So there is that connection. But what I also think that was very important is what Caleb had talked about, was the continual approximation that exists, and how he explained it within terms of the perfect circle never really existing and coming into existence. And that loop, that element of the loop is essential, because I think that understanding that is that we understand our limitations within our knowing. And the fact that we have limits of understanding, that allows us to remain humble in realizing that we don't have all the answers, which gets back to my original point when I was speaking earlier about the ills of dogma that actually that cause us to sometimes it creates a circle that doesn't exist in reality. So where we're no longer listening, we're just actually pushing, or as Caleb had talked about, appropriating our ideas on other people. And I think that that's where the hubris comes in, even the idea, if we think we can relate it to the Tao, where the Tao is like the idea of we can go too far in naming things and categorizing things. And we do that by thinking we have all the answers. So we appropriate and push our perspectives on everyone else, as opposed to the example that you had given, Shrikant, with the idea of authentic relating, where the element of it, coming in and understanding the self, and then you see yourself as interconnected to something bigger, and the interconnections that exist. And that's at the heart of comprehensivity in Bucky. And Bucky has a lot of, had a lot of dealings with the transcendentalists as well, that see us as connected as a whole, how we're all connected together. So I think from that perspective, and his definition of universe within that framework in CJ's essay is, I think, essential as far as understanding what it means to be a comprehensivist.
Thank you, Joe. I want to pick up on one point there. That is the point that Caleb made. One thing that is one of my absolute favorites here is Bayes' law, because that actually captures that entire approach to life of saying that you have your priors and you regard them as priors, and then you're actually doing stuff, and then you're taking feedback from it. We did meetups on the OODA loop of John Boyd, which is actually the way to, it's the greatest, kind of the widest, one of the more influential applications of that loop of saying that you observe, orient, decide, and act. And you keep doing that. So you observe, so you're taking in data, and then you're orienting yourself. You can see what is going on. You have to make up your mind what is going on. You, as a living being, do not have the option of saying, oh no, I'm just going to observe. No, you need to do things. So you have to orient yourself, and then you have to decide that this is exactly what I need to do. And then you act. And then you use that as a way to reobserve, reorient, decide, and act. So yeah, it's pretty incredible. So
Can I actually just add to that, because I think there's an important part of this. Bayesian thinking is a tool for generalized principles. It's not the actual framework. So I mean, there are approaches to that, but there are generalized principles that inform the framework versus the actual tool being the framework. That's the only, it's an important tool at that, though.
Okay.
That's my thought.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. All right, folks, this was great meetup. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon. Good night, everybody. Bye.